that pension. Goodness me, there's lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, Laurie Goldstein, let's talk about the carbon tax. And he says 5 provinces, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, issue a joint statement calling on the federal government to scrap the carbon tax entirely. The tax is having a disproportionate impact on affordability without creating options for people to move away from fossil fuels. There is no alternative. If you want to heat your house, you're using oil, or you're using, a heat pump's not going to work. Just because somebody tells you it's going to work doesn't mean it's going to work. It's not a viable alternative to the oil and gas that does work. And so these things are necessities of life. You can't just opt out of being warm, right? You just can't opt out of eating, right? So these things shouldn't be taxed, and they shouldn't have a situation where they're being phased out with no viable replacement, like heat pumps. And people are pushing back on that. Here's the food professor noting the same thing. He says, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have united in their call to terminate the carbon tax program. In a mere 5 minutes, the Prime Minister unintentionally triggered a carbon tax crisis and forfeited all moral authority over the policy. Train wreck. Yep, he absolutely did. The lies they told about how the carbon tax actually makes things more affordable were obviously lies, and everybody knew it. And they said, why are you lying to people? And they didn't care. The government didn't care and continued lying to people. And now they're responding to tanking in the polls in the Atlantic provinces by removing the expensive carbon tax, and that's going to undermine their position in everything else they've said, right? Especially with the carbon tax, especially with keeping it on natural gas and other fuels used to heat homes, propane, etc. So it's not good. The food professor's all in on the carbon tax too. He likes the carbon tax. He thinks it's a very important piece of legislation. He says that's why we're witnessing the intellectual advocates of the carbon tax vigorously defend their stance. Even the Bank of Canada has joined the discussion. Ottawa is indeed panicking. So yep, there's a whole bunch of people who are stakeholders in this carbon tax thing, and they're realizing how massively they've screwed up. And, well, people are pushing back on it, which is great. 5 provinces united and pushing back on all of this nonsense. That's good. The writing's on the wall, but that doesn't mean we've won anything yet. Don't count any chickens. Here's Andrew Scheer, and he's going on a tour to axe the tax. So the Conservatives are really shopping their platform. This is election-style politicking. Okay, Andrew Scheer, this is ground game. This is what people mean when boots on the ground are talked about with regards to campaigning, etc. So you've got big names spending their time to talk to constituents in ridings where it may be a tipping riding, it may be up in the air, it may be a liberal riding, but Andrew Scheer's out there shopping this platform, shopping these slogans, okay? And he says, Liberal MP Vivian Lapointe has a choice on Monday. We have forced a vote to scrap the carbon tax on home heating oil for all Canadians. Will she vote for tax relief for the people of Sudbury, or will she sell them out? Conservatives will take the tax off so you can keep the heat on. So that's interesting. Andrew Scheer visits Sudbury to promote axing the carbon tax. The Conservative Party of Canada is calling out Liberals for introducing a carbon tax exemption for heating oil, asking why other forms of home heating fuel weren't included. So it really feels like a shift in the wind because the newspapers are getting on board with this as well. Here's Jagmeet Singh, and he's talking about food here. Justin Trudeau only wants to help those who vote for him. Pierre Poilievre protects profits of big oil CEOs. I want to take the GST. Okay, he's talking about home heating. I want to take the GST off of all forms of home heating and help you. Next week, Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre will have a chance to vote on my plan. So Poilievre came out and said, you have to remove the carbon tax. And Jagmeet Singh can't support that because that would put the confidence and supply agreement they have with the Liberals in jeopardy. So what does he do instead? He says, I'm going to remove the GST. So the Conservatives, maybe the Conservatives will agree with the NDP and move to remove the GST on the heating oil as well, right? So the Conservatives vote with the NDP and that happens. But the NDP will vote no for removing the carbon tax because they're ideologically aligned with the Liberals, right? And Sue says, I can see it now. The Conservative Party has a motion to remove the carbon tax. Jagmeet Singh votes no because he wants to remove the GST. The Liberals will vote no to both, and around we go. So I think the Conservatives could vote with the NDP to remove the GST, and bingo, bango, bongo, there you go, right? There's a medium win right there for the Conservatives that's handed to them by the NDP. Fine, take that, right? But then you work on the NDP you bring the motion up again. You bring it up to the NDP and say, well, why do you want to have no GST on home heating tax, but this carbon tax is okay? What's up with that? So it'll be an interesting legislative week, just because the Conservatives, again, more fight in them than I've seen, and more procedural stuff. Also, like forcing votes in the House to then use that vote, even the prospect of the vote, as we just saw with Andrew Scheer, to browbeat Liberals and to threaten them in their ridings. Okay, so that's the use of it, and it works. So it works. It works to change the conversation. It works to keep the Liberals fighting to keep their talking points center stage, rather than allow the Conservatives to take control and hijack it. But the Liberals they don't have the rhetoric that the Conservatives have. And the Conservatives have been testing this rhetoric. They have been utilizing this rhetoric, the bring it home, the axe the tax, powerful paychecks. They've had such success that both the NDP and the Liberals have been stealing their slogans, because the Liberals and the NDP slogans don't have anything. They're empty. The rhetoric is empty. People aren't interested in hearing how racist everybody is anymore. People aren't interested in hearing how downtrodden everybody is and how these guys are going to make things more affordable. It's nonsense, and everybody knows it. They've been laid bare. They've been proven liars. So they're trying to key into what Mr. Poilievre is keying into. So it's very interesting to watch. We'll see if it's effective. If you believe the polls, and I'll show you the polls in just a minute, it's been very effective. And we'll see if it turns into electoral success. We'll see. Here's Brett Wilson. And this is just an interesting war on cars, war on carbon generally. City of Calgary to implement residential parking fees at 40% lower cost than first proposed via the Calgary Herald. This is easily the stupid thing the city of Calgary has ever done. Yes, I can afford it, but it's a terrible revenue source. So the first parking lot, like if you don't have a driveway, you can pay to park on the street. If you pay to park on the street, it's $40 for the first car, $70 per year, $75 for the second car, and then you can buy 2 guest passes, and I think the third car is even more, $125 or something like that to park, right? And so this is interesting, and people don't like feeling like they're being nickeled and dimed to death. You can't have they're talking about in Guelph, if you build a house, you have to have a parking spot with the house. And now they're talking about like that's an impediment to building homes, don't you know? You can't build houses because we can't find the parking for all those houses that we want to build. So they're saying because we have such great transit, we don't have great transit. We have such great transit, we can forego the parking in these units because we'll have such great transit. And I think it's absolutely foolish that they're doing it. It's an attack on common sense, but it's an attack on the people who are going to be buying a house that they don't get parking. Like if you buy a house in downtown Toronto, a condo in downtown Toronto, you barely get a full house. You get, kind of a half bedroom and a half living room and a comically small kitchen to a degree, right? I mean, some of the condos are unbelievably good at using the space and the layout, but it's still not like a house, 1,200 square foot, where you have a backyard and a front yard and a parking spot for 2 cars. It's incredible how tolerant people are of these products that are a lot worse than even what we grew up in. It's incredible. It's incredible that people are okay with it. And they spend so much money. Like my parents bought a house for $50,000 or something to that effect in the early 90s. And that was expensive at the time, but they were able to afford it and buckled down and saved money and all that stuff that you heard from your parents. But it was $50,000, and now it's $500,000, and you get a half bedroom and a half kitchen and like a half bathroom. You know what I mean? I'm sure there's 1.5 bathrooms, right? Maybe you get a powder room on the first floor if you've got a first floor, but it's drastically different than what you could afford on a proper salary for a family 100 years ago, right? And even 100 years ago, it was the beginning of kind of the modern theft that we're experiencing through the Fed and all the things that have happened there, fiat currency and all of that. But I think that still they were better off 100 years ago than we are now with regards to being able to afford certain things. But then the argument's made, oh, well, healthcare wasn't taken care of. All of these other deficiencies that we've solved those problems now, the disaffected people are no longer disaffected, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but yes, but monetarily, we're in a very, very different situation. The country's in a very different situation. We can't afford this social security system that we've built up. And I don't know that it honestly does protect people if you talk about healthcare. So like, I have a hernia. I've talked about this before. And I realized I had the hernia in August. I went to the doctor in August. The doctor referred me to a surgeon in August. I didn't hear from the surgeon yet. I have not heard from the surgeon yet. It is now November. Even though my referral presumably went through, I called them and they said, yeah, we'll call you back. And I was like, okay. So they haven't called me. Since then, I learned I do not want to have a hernia surgery in the general kind of system because it's bad and it has bad outcomes generally. And people who have had that surgery through that system have messaged me and said, do not do that. It's a bad idea. So I contacted a private clinic. The private clinic has processed me and I could have had my date, right? But they can't find any anesthesiologists, the people to put people to sleep for the surgeries. So because they can't find anesthesiologists, they have to pause the surgeries or cancel the surgeries. And this has been a problem since COVID. They can't find or keep anesthesiologists in Ontario. And I've heard this is a big widespread problem. And so the healthcare is incredible. And so I'm just making the argument that we have gone from a situation where we were lower taxed, things were more affordable, but there wasn't such a robust social safety net. And maybe people are willing to make that trade. Maybe that's just like a trade you make, right? But I'm making the argument that we are taxed heavily and the social safety net that we are led to believe we have is not nearly as robust as we think it is, partly because of the number of people coming in and using, like non-citizens are using shelter space, non-citizens are using healthcare space, all sorts of things like that. And partly because the politicians themselves are not funding, they're funding a massive bureaucracy, but not actually funding the service underneath it, right? Like you need 100 managers to serve 150 direct consumer people. And really what you need is 250 direct consumer people and 3 managers, if you need 3 managers, right? But we've got hundreds of managers doing this terrible job and we fund it all. We spend the money on that. And they say, we're increasing the funding on healthcare and, but not for nurses because they're unionized and capped, right? But if you're a hospital administrator, that's not unionized. There's no capped position there. We need the best of the best. That's a $500,000 position. Yeah, but a nurse is capped at $190,000, right? Pretty wild stuff. So we don't do a good job at getting value for our money now because of the amount of money printed by the government and the 2% inflationary target yearly, which devalues our money yearly and has been going on for years, decades. So we don't get bang for our buck and we're heavily taxed. And from that taxation, we don't actually get the services that were promised. But people will fight you on that. If you tell them that, people will fight you. They don't like to hear it. Because they think that Canadian healthcare is the best in the world. Nope. Don't get a hernia, man. You'll wait forever. And hernias are annoying. They're very annoying. Okay. Polling Canada. I told you that Liberals were bleeding seats. Here's proof. But polls are meant to influence the public perception of what's going on. PPC is not on this poll, right? So that's interesting to note, but the Bloc is on this poll and the NDP are on this poll and the Greens are on this poll. The PPC is above the Greens. The Bloc is not even a federal party that has seats Canada-wide. Can you have a federal party where you only have seats in like southern Saskatchewan? We have 3 seats and we've won all 3. Yay. I just don't think so, right? But that's how the Bloc works. And I think that it's stupid. And I think we're being manipulated by it. But if you believe the seats and if you believe the polls, the PPC does not exist and the CPC will have, this is a seat projection. So on here, it's not percentage, it's seats. So on here, the PPC doesn't exist because nobody's projecting any seats for them. 207 for the Conservative Party, CPC, 81 for the Liberals. That's pretty wild. 81. It's still too high. Who the heck is voting for these people? Like, honestly, do you like Canada being completely destroyed? Bloc would get 28. The NDP would get 20. Still too high for the NDP. They should be 9, 4, 1. Why? Who? Again, 20. Why? I just don't get it. And the Green Party gets 2. Elizabeth May and The Green Party's an absolute nightmare of a party. It has absolutely nothing to offer its members other than rhetoric that reinforces their narrative, but it's not even a correct narrative. And their rhetoric is not like we're going to solve this problem in a very humanistic way. It's talking about carbon taxes and shutting down human activity to align with what nature needs in order to survive. I don't know how anybody can claim to know that. Like, who can claim to know what the circumstances are to achieve that? It seems idiotic. Anyway, 2 seats for the Green Party. Sure, why not? Here's Laurie Goldstein. He says, in what universe does a 1-year mandatory minimum sentence for child luring constitute cruel and unusual punishment? So the court has struck again. The Supreme Court of Canada rules mandatory minimum sentences for child luring. That's unconstitutional now. So, it depends on the circumstances for luring that child. I'm not sure about that. I think that's pretty silly if you ask me, but I mean, Canada's a pretty silly place these days, don't you think? Here is the food professor, and he is talking about, the other day I showed you this. This is from October 30th, where Tiff Macklem is being asked by different representatives in the in this committee meeting. I don't think it says it is House of Commons, it says. FINA committee. They're asking Tiff Macklem how much the inflation was, and he was saying that the carbon tax is only 0.6 of inflation, and it would only be a one-time thing. If you reduce the carbon tax, it would only be a one-time reduction, and it would just catch up really quick. But I don't think that that's true, because the carbon tax was making gas more expensive in a continually upticking way, right? So if gas is continually getting more expensive because of the carbon tax, then if you take the carbon tax off the gas, then the farmer has a more stable source of fuel that is not ticking up in price artificially because of bad policies of the government. So just because you take the carbon tax off once, if it stays off, then that savings stays forever, and I think it compounds. Anyway, the response to Tiff Macklem's answers, which weren't good enough, in my opinion, was this: the only reason why the Bank of Canada chose to go after one academic without refuting any claims made was because this one academic, the food professor, was asking questions the bank did not like. The questions asked in Parliament came from our inquiries. So this morning we have submitted 9 more questions to the bank following this week's testimony. These are all questions reporters and intellectuals should ask, but won't. 1, what specific data and economic models were used to arrive at the 0.6 estimate for the impact of eliminating the carbon tax on inflation? Can the Bank of Canada provide a breakdown of the assumptions and variables considered in your calculations for this estimate? So what's your methodology? How did you arrive at this 0.6% for carbon tax impacting food? Because that's what they're saying, and that's what we're supposed to work with. So in order to get to that number, I would imagine you reverse engineer some things, and it's not making sense. But back to this. Number 3, how sensitive is the estimate to changes in key assumptions, such as the level of carbon tax, the consumer behavior, and market dynamics? 4, has the bank considered the potential second-order effects of eliminating the carbon tax, such as changes in energy consumption and production, shifts in investment patterns, or effects on other industries? Furthermore, why isn't the bank analyzing other components, not only 3, of the consumer price index, such as food, in relation to this estimate? 5, what historical or international examples does the bank rely on to support this estimate, and how well do those examples align with the Canadian economic context? 6, are there any studies or research papers that have reached different conclusions regarding the impact of carbon taxes on inflation? If so, how does the bank's estimate reconcile with these different perspectives? 7, what measures are in place to continuously monitor and update the estimates as economic conditions and policies change? In other words, will your 0.6 estimate increase as the carbon tax increases over time until it reaches $170 per metric ton in 2030? I think it's supposed to reach that in 2030, not 23. Can the Bank of Canada provide a range of potential impacts rather than a single point estimate, considering the inherent uncertainty in economic forecasting? 9, how does the bank account for potential behavioral changes, such as shifts in consumer preferences in their estimate? We'll inform you once we receive a response. Remember to ask questions and not to overlook the data. Revising the government's testimony, or revisiting the government's testimony from October 30th, pay close attention to his words. His statement regarding the one-time 6% drop underscores that the policy is indeed playing a role in driving inflation. And they're saying that this 0.6% indicates that it's playing quite a big role in inflation. It's not just a minor role, it's quite large. Here's just a little bit of this. Here we go.
One question is, because the carbon tax is going up, right, over time. Mm-hmm. So one question is, how much are the increases in the carbon tax adding to inflation each year? And that number is about 0.15 percentage points of inflation. And that's the direct impact on those three components.
Perfect, thank you.
The second question you asked me was, what would be the effect if the carbon tax, what would be the effect on inflation if the carbon tax was eliminated? And that would create a one-time drop in inflation of 0.6 percentage points.
Okay.
So that would last 1 year, and since you can only eliminate it once, the next year it would have no effect on inflation.
For sure. And hopefully next year inflation won't be as a big a concern as it is this year. But just to reiterate what you said there, so it would be 60 basis points or 0.6%, which currently the inflation rate is at 3.8%. So that equates to more than 10, I think almost 15%, if I can do the math quickly,
well,
in a drop in inflation. So, is that would be a sizable drop in inflation. It would make your job, to quote you, it would be helpful.
And what he's saying is it would be helpful if the government and the economic policy was rowing in the same direction of stopping inflation together. Carbon tax does not help with that. It is inflationary, as just demonstrated by the testimony there. Here is Jagmeet Singh again, talking about food, this time for real. He says grocery CEOs are raking in the profits and you're paying the price. In Ottawa, two friends are helping keep prices high, Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre. I have a bill to lower grocery prices for you and tackle corporate greed. But he doesn't want to talk about the carbon tax because he wants to repeal GST from home heating, right? Sure, Jagmeet Singh. It's one unbelievable lie after another, right? Just unbelievable stuff going on. Any kind of bill targeting grocery store CEO greed or anything like that is purposely ignoring the real problem. And the real problem, of course, is carbon tax making prices more expensive because you're increasing the cost of the input, right? If it takes a farmer $10 to put and I'm just using this to make it nice and clean and easy to understand, $10 to put gas into their tractor to plow their field to produce their goods, then $10 is the input. If you then take that $10 and increase it to $100, let's just say, then the price of food that he produces is going to increase because his input costs have increased. He needs to keep his profits at a certain percentage in order to make producing the foods worthwhile. In order to do that, there's a mathematical calculation that if the input is X, and it's not just fuel that's the input, there'd be feed, fertilizer, the seeds themselves, all sorts of things that you need to consider, right? Not just gas, but when you take one of the components of the inputs and increase it by a lot of money, 50%, 30%, 40%, then you're going to take the total cost of food and you're going to increase it by quite a lot of money, right? Like I think it just makes sense to me, but other people are purposely confounded by the purpose of the rhetoric from the Liberals, from to a degree to the Conservatives about the carbon tax is to confuse you and to make you think that this is somehow helping. But it doesn't help anything. It just makes everything cost more. Joe Blow says something needs to be clarified. Scott Moe didn't grow a set. Moving on. He's fighting for political survival. He is hemorrhaging support to the new populist Saskatchewan United Party, as you can see in the by-election results from a couple of months ago. Saskatchewan United has been hammering Moe on taxes and woke schools for a year now. If you like what Moe is doing recently, thank the Saskatchewan United Party. Yeah, so that's an interesting situation with the Saskatchewan United Party really kind of making inroads here. So I'll be interested to see how that shapes up. Maybe Ontario needs a United Conservatives Ontario, UCO. That'd be interesting. Honestly, when we get to that point, the UCP had a convention yesterday, and Danielle Smith made a speech. It was a good speech generally. There are things that she's missing though, and they'll be illustrated within this show as well. Actually, we're almost there. Wall Street Silver says, she surprised me. I did not expect this from her. Very serious what's going on in America. They're indoctrinating students to go against their parents. This is Marxism. So to look at this woman, you would not expect the words coming out of her mouth. She has got the best mohawk I've ever seen. She looks like if you were playing Double Dragon, or if you were playing like a 90s video game, she looks like a background character who would be like a tough guy that you might have to fight with a Ninja Turtle. Here we go.
Here's what's going on in America, because they are indoctrinating students. They're indoctrinating students to go against their parents. And this is Marxism. This is socialism. I'm very familiar with it. And I want everybody to educate themselves. They have taken positions in government. They have taken positions in schools to bring about their ideology. And it's very radical. It's extreme radicalism. I'll give you an example, because I'm black. One way they can spread this indoctrination is they'll say, well, that's anti-black, or you're being racist. But I know what Marxism is. I know what socialism is. And they will hide it under a guise. Well, we're going to teach first graders about sex. And we're going to do this because this is about equal rights. But it's not about equal rights. Socialist Marxism, they'll see it's right here on these universities, and they started in the private schools, and now they're going to the charter schools, and they're going to the public schools. And they're teaching, like in socialist countries, to be spies, so we spy on each other. Don't tell your parents. Trust the teachers. Don't trust your parents. Your parents have to take care.
Yeah, the parents have to take care of you. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how broadly people are becoming aware of this. One of the most interesting things I thought that she says is, somebody tells you that's very anti-black, that's very racist. And she said, but I know what Marxism is. That is the perfect response, the absolute perfect response, because that's exactly what Marxism tries to get you to do. It tries to get you to fight each other based on race, and you can't criticize anybody, specific people, because that's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, right? And that is a Marxist tool to protect a specific group of people from criticism while opening up other people to criticism. You can't say that. That's anti-Semitic. You can't say that. That's anti-black, right? It shuts down the conversation and it reorients people to fight amongst themselves. It's such an insidious ideology, and it propagates itself very well because the adherents to it are taught through the ideology how to propagate it. It's very, very insidious. Robert Fife says, India envoy tells Ottawa to produce evidence that New Delhi was behind the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So that whole India scandal is rearing its ugly head again. I thought we got rid of that 2 scandals ago. Holy cow. Wasn't there a China scandal somewhere in the most recent history? I wonder what happened there. 2 Michaels? That's a little far. That's scandals a few scandals ago, right? There's a newer China scandal. Interference or something. Anyway, Danielle Smith, this is the UCP Danielle Smith speech, and it's 17 minutes. I listened to it on double speed. She's got applause and boo lines here. She says, we've never been content with average. We are not a people to say not, excuse me, I'll start again. We are not a people to say good enough when there's so much more possibility in front of us. And we do not shy away from a challenge, not when the future of our families and our friends and our neighbors are at stake. I know that nothing, absolutely nothing, will stand in our way. May Alberta be forever strong and free. Here's just a little bit of this speech. She's got a huge, huge audience. More than 3,800 people showed up at this convention. So this is the AGM, the annual general meeting for the UCP. And it's it's a big one. So good for the UCP. And here's Danielle Smith.
Look to our province to protect and foster the principles of freedom, of civil rights, of free enterprise, and economic prosperity. They look to us to demonstrate the power of compassionate conservatism and show why we are creating a powerhouse and a job-creating economy like ours and why that's crucial to delivering the healthcare and education and public safety and social support programs that our citizens need without mortgaging our children's futures with crushing debt and high taxes. The entire world is looking to us right now to demonstrate that reducing emissions and developing our natural energy resources are not in conflict with each other. In fact, the only way the world will ever meaningfully reduce emissions while avoiding energy poverty for billions is to develop our energy resources using the new and emerging technologies being funded by that very resource development. History has shown time and again that economic growth and technology are the keys to solving global poverty and environmental challenges. It is the eco-extreme dogmas of people like Stephen Guilbeault, eco-extreme dogmas such as limiting economic growth, energy scarcity, and centralized control of people's activities. These are failed policies that lead to extreme poverty, soaring crime and addiction, poor environmental outcomes, and the loss of personal freedoms and civil rights. And my fellow Conservatives, Alberta is leading, and we must continue to lead.
There you go. The big boo line there on Stephen Guilbeault. She gets a boo line for Justin Trudeau as well. It's interesting, but I have questions. I have questions about why isn't Danielle Smith saying anything about the Coutts 4? Where's their legal representation? Did you know? And I didn't know this. Jeremy McKenzie points this out. He says, I have a question. Why is it that 3 of the 4 men detained in Coutts are represented by legal aid after hundreds of thousands of dollars were raised? Now there's need for another $150,000 and 3/4 of them don't even have paid legal representation. Am I reading this right? Where is, and he says this doesn't include the money that Rebel grifted on their behalf and then took to fund a booze cruise. So Rebel funded money or fundraised money for these guys and then I guess just abandoned them. So that's interesting. Ezra blocked me. I think that's also interesting. I have questions, right? And so where's all this money? Here's Steve and he says you would... Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to canadapoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.